Go ahead. Just try to provoke me.
Oh, I just got up, man.
Oh, come on. Bust your daddy's chops.
Fine.
United Studios presents the Procreative Podcast with J MARZ.
Welcome to the Procreative Podcast. This is J MARZ. My guest today is Timo Massa. Tim is the marketing director with the Mishawaka Ampitheater here in Colorado. He also plays with the band Stella Luce. He's been heavily involved in the music scene in Fort Collins for over a decade, and he is also a dad. At one point, Tim was playing with about 5 different bands. He now manages the Mish Initiative, which is a community fund for artists. We covered a lot of ground. I really enjoyed this conversation, and now I give you Timo Massa. I'm here with Timo Massa. Tim, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Tim, you're the marketing director with the Mishawaka Amphitheater, and you play in the band Stella Luce. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what else you do, kind of how you got involved in the Fort Collins scene and other projects you've played with?
Cool. Yeah. I moved to Fort Collins in 2003 for freshman year of college. Kind of quickly started forming and joining bands. After that, my first band here in town was called Giant Cog's Turn. I was 19. There was 5 of us, and it was a crazy roller coaster of a time. That was really my first experience, like playing in front of an audience. So I kind of fell in love with it and knew that I wanted to be doing that in some context for the rest of my life. So throughout college, I dicked around, failed a bunch of classes. At one point was in 5 bands, and that's when I found out I was going to be a dad. So quickly downsized a bunch of those bands, kind of reset priorities, went through a messy breakup, and became kind of a career guy. I went almost a full 2 years without playing any music. And then I was fortunate enough to join Stella Luce. I had known Brett and Elena from that band from way back in my Giant Cog's Turn days. We used to play shows together. And so when I joined that band, it was kind of the most successful band I'd ever been in. They already had fans when I joined them. So it's a whole new experience for me, and it opened me up to a different aspect of the music business. And that kind of led to me switching careers. I was basically just doing whatever would be a steady paycheck, and then decided I still wanted to be in music, even if I couldn't be touring and all that. So I took a couple jobs marketing for music venues, just kind of making a bunch of part-time jobs equal a full-time paycheck, which was crazy. I did that for about 1.5 years and had too many email addresses, just too much to keep track of. So now at the Mishawaka, I also manage our Mish Initiative, which is a give back program. We give away about $30,000 every year. Half of that goes to music events and programming. The other half goes directly to artists who have cool projects that they're working on, and we just want to help them along. So that has kind of become my full-time job, is just marketing at the Mishawaka, which is an outdoor music venue, and then handling the Mish granted sort of application cycles and getting the money to artists where it's needed.
Cool. Well, we'll come back to that at the end, because I definitely want to talk about how, young parents and artists can get involved in some of the work that you're doing with the Mish Initiative. But first I want to ask you, when did you become a parent? Not only, the year, but like where were you at in life? What did that mean to you?
Yeah, so I would imagine, like most young parents, I think I was like 24, maybe even a little bit younger. It wasn't planned. I would never, ever go as far as to call my daughter an accident. But I had been dating her mom for about 2 weeks. I was young, dumb, and the rest of that rhyme. And I was playing in a lot of bands. I was on the verge of failing out of college also, oddly enough. I was in my last semester, And right before then, I had visited my uncle who was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease. And that made a huge impact on me. I came back sort of different and didn't really give a shit about school, period. And so I failed all my classes and played in 5 bands, then found out I was going to be a dad and that I hadn't completed my college degree in my last semester. So it was kind of a huge upheaval for me to kind of put college on the back burner when I was so close to done and just start working, trying to earn some money. And so I immediately quit, I think 3 of the bands that I was in. 1 kind of fizzled out naturally. I remained in Sour Boy Bitter Girl because that was my favorite. I spent about five years in that band. Made that work for as long as I could. Went on tour with that band when my daughter was just under a year old, which was really hard. It was a good experience, but it was really hard. And then sort of ended up leaving that band in a mutual breakup. I could tell that I wasn't around as much or couldn't be around as much, and they were getting ready to spend more time on the road, which, as any young touring musician knows, you're not only not making money, you're just actively losing money.
Right.
It's just not a luxury that I could afford at the time. So, I made it last for a while. We were working on an album and finishing that out.
Which album was that?
Let's see. That was Days After the Fire.
Okay.
We were finishing that. So I played on 90% of that album. Benjamin recorded a few of the bass tracks. And then we kind of got to thinking, like, if he's going to have to hire someone else for a tour, is it really like, I didn't want to put someone else in that position of only being halfway in the band. And that's always been Benjamin's band. It will move on with or without you were in that band. I know most of Fort Collins music scene, at least the good musicians that I like, have spent some time.
So we share
Benjamin.
this too, as I also toured and played with Sour Boy in pretty much the same exact setting, and couldn't really be on the road with it, and got to the point where it was like, well, I don't really want to have to be a halfway member, if you're going to need to get someone anyway, because I'm leading a band and I know personally that would be kind of a pain in the ass. So I give you my graces to do what you have to do.
Yep, exactly. I mean, it's depending on the situation, there are ways to be sort of halfway in a band. That you have horn players who aren't really a member of any band, but they can just fit in. But that, I mean, for one, that's never what drew me to music. I always wanted a band. And so, I just felt like that would create weird tension to have me sometimes be the bass player, but not always. So I just kind of decided it was better to just make a clean break of it and let them move on. At the time, I had my own band as well, which was great. It was with some friends that I've known for a long time, but we weren't really a good band. We were a garage rock band.
What were you called?
We were called House Buffalo. That lasted for a couple years. The singer of that band, Bob, he plays in The Ugly Architect. We were in Giant Cog's Turn together years ago, and he became a dad actually before I did. So that was kind of I can make this work if there's another dad in the band. And we both wrote and sang, and neither of us are really singers. So it was a dad band, like pure definition of a dad band.
Right. Well, part of what I'm hoping to accomplish with, even having these conversations is for people listening and even for ourselves to realize that there are people really just like you with a lot of the same struggles that have no idea what we're doing. We just know that we ended up with this small human that we're taking care of. And also you are still the same person as before you had them, and you have this dream and you want to do this thing. And let's kind of go on to the creative process. I'm really curious how you approach songwriting and collaboration before you had a kid, and did that change?
Yeah, very much. So as I alluded to, I was playing in 5 bands when I found out that I was going to be a dad, and they were all pretty different. I was in a really straightforward punk band. I was in Arliss Nancy for a long time. I was actually a founding member of that band, and they're gone now, but they were a big sort of alt country band on the scene. And I was playing heavier stuff, all these things. And that was kind of where my journey was at the time. I was just playing whatever I could, learning whatever I could, because you pick up so much from these people who are the songwriters. So I was not really the main guy in any band. I was just a guitar or bass player. Really quickly, I knew Arliss Nancy had to go. There was some tensions there. The drummer was basically started being a dick when he found out I was going to be a dad. So it was like, I'm not going to wait for you guys to kick me out. And I'm not in love with alt country music. So that was the biggest change, I think, is I had to become a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? Purposeful in what I was doing creatively. I didn't have the time to just dick around with a bunch of bands. So I narrowed it down to the ones that were most important to me. And then as those kind of fizzled out, and then I didn't know if I was ever going to go back into music. I never stopped playing guitar. I never stopped writing. I just stopped trying to get bands together because that, as you know, is really hard to hold a group of people together. And then some friends of mine and I went to go see Slim Cessna's Auto Club. They're a Denver band, but they're also world renowned. They tour all over the place. We saw them at Surfside 7. This was probably 6 or 7 years ago. They were celebrating their 21st anniversary. And so they're probably in their 40s and 50s. And it was, I mean, that was a really small venue for them. They were kind of doing Surfside a favor. And it was a religious experience for me. I'm not a religious person. So seeing all these people doing what they love in a really small venue that I've played 100 times, that was kind of a turning point for me. That was just like, I got to get back into it. They say if you can live without it, you probably should. And that was kind of where I realized I couldn't live without it. I had to be creating something. And just as timing worked out, Elena, the singer of Stella Luce, put it out there on Facebook that they were looking for someone to play guitar and other instruments. And I've been a fan of that band since they first started. We used to play shows together. So I kind of jumped at it. I was one of a couple people to audition, and that has been, for the past couple of years, kind of my primary creative focus. And that's a really collaborative thing. So that's different than the other bands I was in. It was not like someone was coming to the table with 100% done songs. We were writing them as a group. And yeah, I think that since then I've kind of gotten back into writing and composing more for myself. But again, I think the main thing of how it's changed me is I'm a lot more aware of what I want to be doing and what I'm capable of and what my time constraints actually are. And I also see a lot of people sort of doing the endless touring thing and just making the same mistakes. It's like banging your head into the wall over and over again. Like there are other ways to find success as a musician. And so that's kind of what I'm interested in pursuing now.
Right. I feel like the internet is actually a really good, not a replacement, but in terms of getting yourself out there, I think it's still very underutilized. And actually, I've been discovering a lot of really cool bands just from following them on Instagram lately. And I always figure out what I'm doing just from seeing other people. Like none of this shit like you like go to school for or anything like that. Like you can learn to play guitar at school, but the process of building a project or becoming a better songwriter is something so esoteric that I really only get it from looking at people who I admire doing it.
Totally. Yeah, you just learn by doing.
And it's interesting that you'd brought up having a bandmate that was, not accepting of, this kind of change that you were going through. And I definitely want to maybe expand on that, because for me, I definitely quickly realized that I was not going to front about that. And this is just me. And there are several angles to me, and if you can't accept this part of me, like I really just don't have time for this relationship, because there are any number of things that I could be doing with my time, and I don't have time for all of them. So yeah, I mean, have you had to say no more to stuff? How have you kind of managed like what you get involved with? What's the decision-making progress?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say no to a lot. So my situation now, I guess I skipped over that part. I got married, and now I have 2 additional kids who are very close in age to my daughter, and they also have joint custody with their dad. So that has actually been very, very beneficial to me. I don't know what my situation would look like if I had my kids all the time. Of course, I would love to have them all the time, but that's just not the reality. So it's fortunate that every other weekend I'm wide open. It's like I don't have kids. I can travel somewhat. But the way that works the other way is that on the weekends that I do have kids, I'm not going to go to your show. And I think that I see that upset people. And I stay involved in the music scene here in a number of other ways, but I want to go to all your shows. I can't ever do it, especially if it's a Tuesday or Wednesday. Like those are my guaranteed family nights. If it's a Friday, Saturday that I have kids, I'm probably not going to buy a baby. Like, I think raising them is more important. So coming to realize that too, like, that as they grow up faster and faster, and every Friday night that you miss could be important to them. So realizing that, like, maybe my music scene friends are not as important as my own kids. They have their own dads, these guys. So I think that is probably the biggest impact, is I can't really be a part of the scene like I used to, and I just kind of have to be okay with that. Like, it is what it is. I'm not going to be out every weeknight drinking and going to your shows. I'll support, I'll buy your CDs when I can, go to the festivals, but yeah, you have to get rid of that idea. And I find that whole scene thing to be a little bit, it's delusional and it's hypocritical to some extent. Like, people will get pissed off at you for missing their show, and like a friend, but you can't rely on your friends to build a career. That's just not, you need fans. You need fans who aren't your friends to come to your shows and buy tickets. So I don't really have too much patience for people who will hold that against you, you know?
Right. And I think that anyone who really understands this maybe speaks to the kind of division that I personally feel, is that there's this music scene and there's all these people that I've come to know as friends, and this is like my network and people I love. On the other hand, I have this whole other side that most people don't really know or care about. I mean, we'll talk about it, but in terms of, really being involved or helping out or anything like that, they're very separate. And I think that if any, the people who are the most close to you ought to be accepting of that part about you. Like, that's just where he's at now. And
yeah, you really realize who your actual friends are. When I split up with my daughter's mom, that was pretty eye-opening for me. And that's kind of how I ended up forming this other band with my friend Bob, because him and his wife had kids and they had a house in town. And so that was where I stayed, because I couldn't move in with any of my other musician friends in their early 20s. That's not really a comfortable place for kids. And yeah, I think when you're young, socializing and kind of having your tribe is so important. But having kids absolutely changes all that. You realize that most friends are fair weather friends. You have a few who will stick it out for you and remain your friend, even though you have kids, and even though you're not going to make it out every time. Those friends who stick with you through that are the most valuable. They get it, and they don't care if they don't see you for 2 years, because they understand you're busy.
Yeah, and I think the intentionality, even though you are able to do less in terms of the things that you may be associated with being supportive to the music scene, like going to shows, these things become less possible. But there's other ways that you begin to be able to help out, maybe in more meaningful ways, like, being involved with the Mish for you. This is something that people could hit you up about, and it's an important resource, and maybe you can't go to their show, but you can direct them to money that could help fund their project or something like that.
Yeah, so I had one of my oldest friends from our old band, Giant Cog's Turn. He lives in Austin now, and his name is Austin, which can be confusing.
Very cool.
He came to visit a couple of months ago, and he was asking me about he hasn't lived here for a long time, and he was just like, well, who do you hang out with now? Who are your friends? And this is depressing, but I was just like, I have friends. I have friends in my band, and I have friends that I work with. And most of my other friends don't live in this town, so I don't hang out with a lot of people. And then I told him kind of the position that I've found myself in here is I'm like a dad for bands as well. So that sort of paternal side of me has shown itself in other ways. Probably the most notable. So when I was doing all the marketing at venues, I also got a side gig managing Cohere Bandwith, which is closed now. We closed last December, but it was just a rehearsal studio here in town. And I say just a rehearsal studio. Really, we did all kinds of events. We worked with bands to get their own beer brewed. We had little showcase events. We had, I would do like marketing seminars. And that's when you really like can take a step back and think about how naive you were at 19 and how, maybe like myself, I didn't know musically where I wanted to go. I was just trying everything. So it's cool to be in a position to maybe offer a little bit of advice. I don't claim to know anything or know any better than anyone else, but at the same time, if a band says, I'm trying to get a gig at Hodi's and I don't know who to contact, if I can share it and if I can tell the booking agent at Hodi's, hey, check out this band, they're my friends and they're good, give them a chance, like that's huge to me. So that is that's how I get involved in the scene now, through the Mission Initiative, through my former work at Cohere Bandwith, just kind of almost in an administrative guidance sort of way.
More important, at least in my opinion, than showing up to the show, because at the end of the day, the band has got to get it fans, not just me coming to the show.
Exactly.
And, I think the more it's more important to have your creative friends network expand, because I think that's the important thing about a community, is that everyone has different skills that kind of fill in the gaps. I mean, for the label that we run, Moon Magnet, we have to have somebody who's good at producing, somebody who's good at video, somebody who's good at graphic design, and having those skills all feeding together is more important to create something vibrant than, if we're able to make all of each other's, small favors like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the DIY thing is great. And being in Sour Boy Bitter Girl, I watched how Benjamin would, have everything under control. He had a bass line written, even if he hadn't performed it yet. He knew how the bass was going to go. He knew how the drums was going to go. But that's not the only way to do things. And I think for a while I got stuck in that, I need to be able to produce this myself. And really, I didn't get a sense of community until a few years ago. And when you realize that there is always someone better for the job, there's someone who's already spent that 10,000 hours practicing video editing that can make your video much better than you can. That's a cool thing to start to see how you can bring these things together and become more powerful. You look at the credits for a movie, and thousands of people go into making a movie happen, even a bad one.
It's crazy. And they're all probably getting paid pretty well. This is such a labor of love for all the people that are working in Fort Collins and Denver. And so I feel like there are some taboos around, at least related to family, just the way of being perceived, of choosing to spend your time, how it might look on the outside is a little bit self-interested with your own creative projects, and how much time, especially with you having 3 kids, how do you handle those? Are those expectations there with your family to be a dad a certain way?
Yeah, that's pretty hard. What I love most about my wife is she does not give a shit about me as a musician, which sounds like that would be a bad thing, but it's awesome because, if you're a creative person, you, like I said, fair weather friends, you get people who like you for this one thing, but they don't really know you. And I can tell you that my wife would honestly prefer that I don't do any of it, but she gets it and she understands why I do. We generally have a pretty good idea of how this will work. again, I try and stay home on the nights that we have kids, and whatever I book or do on those nights that we don't doesn't bother her any. If we're submitting for nationally touring bands and we get it and it happens to be a weeknight that I should be home, she gets that that's a big deal and that's work. Where it becomes problematic, like honestly where I get stressed about it more than anything, is the holidays. Stella Luce is kind of a dark band, so we are at our most powerful at Halloween. Like we get offered good shows at Halloween, and it's always I want to take my kids trick-or-treating. Sometimes you get that thing where it's like a different night that people go trick-or-treating and then the show's on Halloween, but we took that off last year and it felt really good just to hang out with the family. But all holidays kind of are. We did a Valentine's Day show last year. We got to open for Devotchka in front of 1,000 people on Valentine's Day. It was
That was
great.
here in Fort Collins, wasn't it?
Yep,
Yeah.
at Washington's. And wonderful, one of the best shows I've ever played. Not the best Valentine's Day as far as romance and wife goes. You know,
Right.
there's no way to avoid being hurt when your significant other is choosing anything over you, especially on one of these days that society has deemed as just, you're a bad person if you're not making a huge effort on Valentine's Day. And she's not really one of those people to do things just because of societal norms, but that's where we feel it. New Year's Eve, Valentine's Day, and Halloween. And then the, prospect of touring again that'll be something that we kind of have to negotiate. But another thing I've learned about myself is I don't want to just live on the road. I think little 9-day runs here and there are pretty doable in the way that my work is now. It's flexible. So that's something that we're kind of in the process of working out what that's going to look like.
Right. It's definitely, becoming a parent kind of tames your expectations. It doesn't necessarily have to lower them, but it does alter them, and being out on the road, unless you have a lot of family support and a partner that's very accepting, it's just not really that doable. But on the other hand, I feel like I've gone on so many tours that were for nothing.
Exactly. That's what I was. So one of the bands the first band that I quit when I found out I was going to be a dad was Arliss Nancy. And they were the first band to sort of find some success pretty shortly after that. Not because I left, but because they released a new album, got signed to a local record label, and started doing all these things that I would love to do, like touring in Europe. But that was a long time ago. And I look at where my path has gone and where these guys have gone. And the drummer of that band at the time no longer plays music, period. I think that the touring was really hard for them. And they went through so many lineup changes over those years. Now it just dissolved. And Corey, the singer of that band, is a happy dude. And he's living in Germany now, married a German musician, and he's still living the dream. But I saw that it didn't really come true for the others. And I see that all the time with local bands. Like, you do want to get out on tour, and it kind of elevates you as a local band. If you're one of the ones that leaves and plays shows in other cities,
Right.
That makes you a big band here. But it's not worth shooting yourself in the foot. It's
Right.
not worth coming back with no money. It's not worth
Or without a job.
It's not worth going to places that you're not going to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing I think about too is all the small cities in the Midwest that you visit on tour. Just, I don't know. You look at the finances of that. Does it really make sense? Yes, you want to grow the audience there. But again, I think a tour should be something where you're somewhat consistent in hitting these markets and growing something.
Right.
And if you're not doing that, you're just blowing money and wasting time. And yes, it's a great experience.
Right.
Everyone should do it if you can. But again, try to be a little more purposeful in why you're touring. What are you expecting to get out of it? Because I see these bands just go, and then they lose steam and they're done. And yeah, I don't want to be done with music.
Yeah, I think it's just the arc of finding your way in music. Something that hopefully just by listening to this conversation, we can cue people into. But yeah, it's all I wanted to do when I was in my early and mid 20s. And so I'm not trying to discount it, but this has just made me more intentional about why exactly we're doing it and where we're going to go. Right. Because part of this world is that you have other work to do too. You probably are the graphic designer and the writer and all these different things for your own band. And then like yourself, you have a 9-to-5 job, and taking time off is hard, and you're losing money.
Yep.
But that's not to say that touring isn't still viable. I look at some of my favorite bands like Tame Impala, and they pretty rarely tour, and they're not really that long of tours, but they all sell out, and they're short and sweet, and people get really excited about them. Yeah,
I think another good example of that is Devotchka, and Nick from Devotchka is a pretty good, I think, role model of where I would like to be as a musician, where I could see myself going. I've been trying to compose a lot more, both electronic and acoustic, and really all kind of making hip hop beats, really trying to stretch my wings and see what else I can do creatively from the comfort of my own home. Because our first gig opening for Devotchka a couple of Halloweens ago, I gathered that, ever since he did that Little Miss Sunshine soundtrack, he doesn't have to do any of this, They play a couple shows a year, they do short run tours, and he spends the rest of the time working in a home studio composing. And I get just as much of a high out of being in my bedroom, writing something and putting it down as I do playing in front of an audience. It's a different kind of high. But I also find that I can get drained with dealing with audiences and stuff like that. So yeah, just understanding what and I think for me, like a week and a half tour here and there, I could do a couple of those a year, and see the places that I want to see and revisit markets. But at the same time, not burn myself out and not be playing those awkward shows in front of town. I mean, that's still going to happen. That's going to happen no matter what. You can't avoid it. But as few as possible. And I think, hitting bigger cities where there's just more people out. It's a game of odds. You look at shows that I know sell more tickets in Denver than they do when I have them up here. There's over 1 million people in the Denver metro area. We don't have that here. So I think that's part of it too, is you get great experiences in those little towns, but is it furthering your career?
Right.
Probably not.
So when you are working on new music in your home studio, how do you find time to do that? Is it just like whenever it opens up? Do you set aside time?
Yeah, I do it compulsively for one. So I try to set aside time, but sometimes you get that itch and you're laying in bed at like 11 o'clock. You're like, oh, I hear a melody, or there's something weird about the way the fan is clicking back and forth that creates a rhythm in your head, and you just need to get it down. So some of it, I sacrifice other things. I sacrifice sleep or whatever. I also have a lot of flexibility in my job, which is nice. So I usually will have long office days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then I try to work from home Mondays and Fridays. And if I work hard enough throughout the week, I might be off Friday, or I might just work for a few hours. Kids are in school, wife is at work. It is the best possible time for me to record. So I try and set aside at least Friday afternoons. And then those weekends without kids, sometimes I'll just spend a whole day in the bedroom studio.
As far as the content and the feel of music, has that changed how you write?
Yeah. I think what I have recently come to discover is I do dark atmospheric music really well, and to some degree it's almost all that I can do, and I'm just embracing that. So while on the one hand trying to stretch out and and attempt other things, I think it's important to play to your strengths. And I've wasted many years, I feel, as a musician, trying things that I was never that passionate about just to say that I could do it or whatever. And then I realized a couple months ago, I was listening to an old album from that band, Giant Cog's Turn. And in that band, I was just the sort of texture guitar guy. I play kind of a combination of rhythm and lead, but I'm not like a shredder. I can't stand that style of playing. So for me, it's always been about like atmosphere and recognizing that that's what I do best. That's what I was doing successfully when I was 19. And now that's kind of my role in Stella Luce as well. It's kind of come full circle for me. As much as I love being a bass player and all these other things, I realize that the atmospheric stuff and the doom and gloom is like my bread and butter. So I'm just trying to embrace it and explore that and try and push it, because just the same way that I can't write a happy song to save my life, there are a million musicians who couldn't write something that would make you want to kill yourself. Yeah. Not that I'm bragging, but I think I could make you want to kill yourself musically.
So that's the doom and gloom has been a pleasant constant going on since pre-kid and post-kid.
Yeah, I think I'm just a lot more specific, and I know what I'm doing when I'm doing it now.
A confidence in that's your thing.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of settle on a thing and be accepting of ourselves for what it is, because I feel like the mid-20s was kind of just shooting off everything that would pop up and trying to take it all on and like prove something. And now there's nothing really to prove. It just kind of am what I am.
Yeah. I think over time, my view of music has actually simplified quite a bit. I still am mystified by music. No matter how much I study it, it always can evoke emotions that I wasn't expecting, or it never ceases to wow me. But at the same time, as I get older, I also see it as like, the way artists look at something and just see the basic like oval, circular, and cone shapes or rods, whatever that make it up. I think I've gotten a lot better at like hearing when I listen to something the first time, hearing what is really the essence of this, and how can I create something like this, and how can I take this idea that someone else had and sort of co-opt it and try that, but make it my own. I do a lot of that, just hearing something that inspires me and trying to not recreate it, but capture what that was trying to capture.
Is music something that is really, central to your kids or your family, or is this something that kind of like stands out as your thing within your family?
It's really important to all of us. My wife, although she isn't like interested in me as a musician per se, she loves music. We go to a lot of concerts together. My kids, they're 9, and 10, and they all play. They're much more musical than I was at their age. My family was not musical at all. And I begged for a guitar for years before I got one. And then it was always kind of one of those things like, don't hope that you will be a professional I don't know. Not to say I wasn't encouraged, because my parents bought me guitars and they took me to lessons, but especially with my dad, it was always like, that's not a career. That's not a career. And like that, I think I fucking believed it. I heard it so many times. And anything is a career. You know what I mean? If you're passionate about it, anything could be a career. But what my dad did was, he somehow thought like NBA might be a career because we're tall. We're tall people. So he forced me to play every sport that you could imagine. I did at least one season as a kid. And I didn't like any of them, really. I liked hanging out with my friends and doing that stuff, but I don't have a competitive bone in my body. So when it comes to my kids and music, I feel like my goal is to show them how much fun it is and bring them to shows. I bring them up to the Mishawaka as much as I can. My girls love like hula dancing with the hippies. But what I will not do is like force them to play. So for example, they go to Laurel Elementary here, has a great strings program, teach the kids violin. My daughter has been in violin since kindergarten. The other two have been in since first grade. And 2 of the 3 of them just decided they didn't want to do it anymore, which is fine with me. Like, it's a pretty regimented program. It's not like loose sort of rock and roll stuff. And, you know, I'm not going to force them to do it, but they all enjoy it. They love what they love, and they don't, you know, they're just developing their own personalities. They all love 21 Pilots, which is not my favorite band, but I've come to appreciate because my kids just passionately love it. They were really excited to go see Jack White with me this year. Bringing your kids to concerts is another, not to backtrack, but that's something, is an interesting experience too. I had a lady sort of talking shit, if you will. My wife was walking by with the kids and she's like, oh, somebody brought their kids. That's cool. She didn't see me right behind her. And I was like, is that a problem for you that my kids are here? And she like backtracked really quickly. It was, oh, no. I mean, I've got kids too. But like, people think that they're so scandalous and what they're doing is so cool that kids can, I mean, it's not like there's people getting blowjobs at this Jack White concert at the Broomfield Center. Like, if you're smoking weed, that's my problem. And you know, it doesn't bother me. Don't blow it in my kid's face, obviously. But like, I know that bringing them there, that there's going to be people smoking weed. You don't have to worry. Right. As a spectator at the concert, you don't have to worry about my kids being there.
As there would be if I take them to when we live in Denver. I go to the park. Yeah. Like 3 people smoking weed there. Yeah. But it's like we definitely lump these 2 groups in separate place. Like, there's a place for children. Mm-hmm. This is something that I feel like is very unique about our time, is that we kind of like diminish kids in that way. Like, they wouldn't be mature enough to enjoy it. But I like to think of my daughter as just a small, less trained adult. Like, I try to speak to her as maturely as I can. I don't baby talk her, and I assume that she would find interest in a Jack White concert.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't ever remember seeing myself as a little kid. Little kids don't think that way. Conversely, I don't feel any different than I did when I was 18 in a lot of ways. I mean, I know the evidence is there that I've changed, but I don't feel like a 33-year-old, and I don't think that I ever will. So I think age is especially irrelevant when it comes to music. People get kind of stuck in what they liked when they were young, but it's important to move on and realize that it's for everybody. You know, you can listen to a 90-year-old musician make something beautiful that sounds, you feel youth in what they're doing musically, you know? But, you know, with kids too, there's some degree of, if dad likes it, it's just not cool. I love Kendrick Lamar, and I listen to a lot of Kendrick Lamar in my car, just kind of on random with all the other stuff. And one day my daughter says, can we listen to Kendrick Lamar? She kind of said it wrong. And I was like, yeah, do you like Kendrick Lamar? This little boy that she had a crush on likes Kendrick Lamar. So she's, you know, suddenly she didn't realize she's been listening to him for years, but now it's like something we bonded on, and she realized, oh, maybe dad is kind of cool. Right. A little bit. But kind of what you were saying about separating things, I had a really eye-opening experience this summer. The Reminders, which is a hip-hop group from Denver, were up at the Mish, and they have 2 adorable little kids who look just like them. So they're a husband and wife, hip-hop. She's an amazing singer. Their kids look just like little versions of them, and they bring them everywhere, and they bring them on stage. And they had their little boy like freestyling, which was adorable. And what their singer, Asia Black, said about that, they had went on a tour with Lauryn Hill, and Lauryn Hill, also a mother, basically told her, like, don't ever let anyone make you feel bad for bringing your kids into this. Uh-huh. Like, your kids are your crew. This is your life. You're bringing. So especially now, I'm much more likely to just bring them along. Like, there's nothing so scandalous going on that it's going to rock my kids' world. Like, they're already my kids. The language is not going to bother them. It's all like, they're just my crew from now on. So that's kind of musically, obviously very active in Stella Luce, but also not feeling like we're playing the amount of shows that I would like to. Mm-hmm. So I'm working a lot on kind of solo projects that I could ideally take on the road, travel with the family, and just be a family and still get gigs, you know?
Right. It's something that seems so antithetical to the way we look at parenting and career, but it's totally doable, honestly, if you, there's a lot of intention behind it, and that maybe that's been the what we've talked about the most. But it takes some time to set up your life to be able to do that. You got to be able to work remotely on your more money-making gigs, and you got to be able to have good shows and places for them to stay. But really, those should be the important barriers to think about, not like what is like grandma gonna think about,
right,
or like what does my boss think about it. It's like,
yeah, or the other bands, or
yeah,
whatever. Who cares?
Right.
Yeah.
Tim, it's been so awesome talking to you. Thanks for coming on the show. And where can people check out your work and your music?
So check out the Mission Initiative. That's what I'm most proud of work-wise. If you go to themishawaka.com, click on the Mission Initiative tab. That tells you all about the different grants that you can apply for. So if you're a local artist, we're not specifically local, but kind of front range. We give $15,000 in grants. That opens in October. I'm not sure when this will air, but that's every October going forward. And then we also do the Mission Booster, which is more for music events. If you want to host your own festival or something like that, you can apply for funding through us. You do not need to be a nonprofit. Anybody can apply for this, and we do that one twice a year. So yeah, check those out. Check out Stella Luce. We're on iTunes, Bandcamp, all that stuff. STELLA space LUCE. Stella Luce.
The Procreative podcast was produced by me, Jay Mars, at Moon Magnet Studios in Denver, Colorado. It was mastered by Reed Fox, and our music was provided by Kevin Netz. You can find more at moonmagnetmusic.com.